I have been to a lot of funerals in the last 10 years. 16 to be exact. And they were all for members of my high school graduating class. The first was a few days after graduation when the first boy that I ever kissed, a mutual friend and his girlfriend, got into a massive car wreck when driving home. The two guys were decapitated and the girl died a few days later of a brain hemorrhage. The road where they died stood the line of broken trees. The second was 2 months later when our valedictorian took her own life in the parking lot of the high school. The third was 2 months after that, when our class president, the twin of my best friend, drowned in the lake during a fishing trip. I was already settled into my dorm and attending classes when my mom called me to tell me that my best friend was dead. I hadn't been able to reach him for the last few days, but I figured he was just busy with family stuff since his brother had died. Joe hung himself in the bakery owned by his family. No notes and no reason. Everybody chalked it up to the fact that he must have not been able to live without his twin, but I knew that that was bullshit. They hated each other. It went on like this for close to 6 years. My mom would call me, or I would get a call from an old friend that somebody else was dead. I would drive down, go to the funeral, and then leave. After the first 3 years, it just became routine. I honestly didn't think too deeply about it until 2017, when a friend that I had lost contact with over the years died. He had died on some painkillers, but unlike the rest, he left a note. Inaction is just as bad as guilt. I'm sorry. I wish that I would have done something. I drove down to my hometown and stayed with my parents for the first time in a long time. As I pulled out the black dress I had reserved for only funerals, my phone began to blow up with a friend request and a string of messages. Blake Kinsley sent you a friend request. Blake was our star quarterback and the heartthrob of everybody in school. He was funny, polite, and came from a wealthy family, but from what I saw as I looked over his Facebook, he seemed to have peaked in high school and never got beyond that. I accepted his friend request and I opened his message. Hey Katie, I know we never really hung out or talked a lot in high school. I'm here for Kevin's funeral. Would you be willing to meet up with me for a coffee or something? I need somebody to talk to and this is just all so messed up. Hey, holy crap, yeah. This is pretty awful, isn't it? Did you hear about his note? And yeah, coffee would be great. I'll meet you at Starbucks at around 6. Yeah, that sounds good. I'll see you then. That night, I got to the Starbucks and I waited for what seemed like forever. I messaged him a few times and I was close to leaving when he finally showed up. He looked awful. His once prominent cheekbones now stuck out against his thin frame, and it made him look more skeletal than he was. Dark purple circles hung heavy under his eyes and his clothing looked like it was going to fall off of him. Hey, sorry I'm late. I was trying to get Fareed here too, but he wasn't able to leave. Jenna and Michael will be coming too, I think, but who knows? He said as he sat down and he sighed. Fareed was a student who transferred to our school in junior year. He had grown up in Afghanistan during the bad parts of the war and then his family moved here. He went on to be a journalist for a prominent newspaper. Jenna was the head of the Christian club and a hardcore member of the 4-H club. She now owned a pretty good Etsy business and scandalously lived with Mika, the only out lesbian from our school. Are you okay? I asked, looking over him. He shook his head. I haven't been sleeping much. Katie, do you know that the 5 of us is like all that's left? Like out of 65, we are the only ones still alive. He pulled out the yearbook and a binder and slid it over to me. Kevin's family owned the mortuary, so he was always stuck going to the funerals after he started working there. He started saving the programs after Joe had died, and he started a blog about it. I found out after my cousin died and I went to the funeral. He reached out to me and we started talking. He opened the binder. Cecilia Stevens, prom queen turned Pinterest mom, drowned in her pool. He had a copy of the death certificate under the program. Cecilia had just had a baby 6 months before. She was having some issues and our family thought it was just shit new moms go through. She called me a few times, but I was busy with school and I didn't ever get back to her. The last time that she called me, she left a message asking me not to come back to town. She died 3 days later. He flipped the next page and he pointed at it. Trent. He went AWOL after being confined to barracks awaiting disciplinary action. They found him 6 weeks later in Georgia. He had been living in a tent. Cause of death, exposure. He went through the entire book before stopping. You knew a lot of these people, Katie. Joe. Everybody knew Joe and his brother couldn't stand each other. Like, I can name at least 5 times Eric paid football players to beat the shit out of him. Why would Joe commit suicide over something that made his life hell? I nodded. Even though he sounded crazy, what he was saying didn't seem wrong. Yeah, this is all really messed up, but people die. You're driving yourself crazy, Blake, and you need to take a break. I closed the book and I leaned back against the chair, my coffee now long cold. Kevin said 2 weeks ago that he was having nightmares. Seeing shit, getting headaches, and he felt like he was being followed. I told him the same thing. He was driving himself crazy. He's dead now, and now I'm having nightmares. I'm waking up screaming and I see things. I'm scared, Katie. He reached across the table and he grabbed my hand. I know what it sounds like, I know. But please, just try to believe me. I slid my hand away, shaking my head. This has been hard on a lot of people. I think maybe you just need to talk to someone. I stood up, looking at my phone. Look, it's late. I had a long drive today and the funeral is early tomorrow. We can meet up then, okay? I looked him over one last time and I reached into my bag, pulling out a sleeping pill and setting it on the table. I take these to help me sleep. It'll help you too. Get some rest. I walked to the door and I left. He didn't show up at the funeral the next day. Only Fareed did. I talked with him about Blake, but we both wrote it off as him going crazy. We said our goodbyes and we went back home. Fareed died 5 months later during a home invasion. Jenna and Mika died 6 months after that. Jenna of a severe infection, and Mika took her own life following Jenna's funeral. I tried to reach out to Blake again, but he had deactivated his Facebook account. When I drove home, I had found out through the grapevine that he had gone off the grid and was living in a mobile home in the woods. I went to Mika's funeral 3 days ago. Since then, I'm starting to think that maybe Blake wasn't crazy. You know that feeling when you're really tired and your sleep-deprived brain makes you see things standing in your peripheral? It has been happening constantly. It took me 4 hours to write this because I kept standing up to see if my boyfriend was calling my name in the back of the house. Last night, I had my first nightmare. I was walking down Hall C of the high school, and then I was in the auditorium, and then the lunchroom, and then the gym. I felt like something was stalking me, and like I needed to get away. I knew that whatever was following me, it was mad. It wanted to hurt me. I saw it as I stumbled into the biology lab, but only from the corner of my vision. I don't know what it was or even remember what it looked like, but I know it felt like insanity embodied. I woke up screaming, my boyfriend shaking me to calm down. It took me forever to fall back asleep, but I finally did. This time I was in the woods behind the school. I saw Joe, Fareed, Kevin, Mika, just like old times. They were talking quietly and smiled to me when they saw me. I almost walked to join them when I heard, "Katie!" A loud voice called out, and I turned to see Blake. "You're dreaming, Katie. You're dreaming this now too." He rushed over to me and he looked worse. He had shaved his head and his eyes looked sunken into his skull. "Blake, what the hell is this?" I asked, starting to turn around when he stopped me. "Don't look at them, Katie, don't," he said, holding my shoulders. "When you wake up, I need you to come see me. Please, call my uncle. He'll tell you where I am. Tell him Pal Chuck. It's our word." Behind me, I heard rustling and the look of absolute terror came over his face. "I have to go. Don't look at them, Katie. Just try to wake yourself up." With that, he ran deeper into the woods. The movement grew closer, and I turned despite what he said. Joe was the closest, his neck stretched far too long with heavy bruising under his jaw. His head lay on his shoulder from where it had broken, his walking jerky and staggered. Behind him, Kevin and Mika walked and quickly caught up, both with foam around their mouth, bloodshot eyes and blue lips. Fareed stumbled behind them. His skull caved in and his left eye laying against his bruised and blood-caked cheek. I woke up screaming again, and this time I didn't try to go back to sleep. I found his uncle and I got directions to where Blake is staying. I hope he's still alive when I get there. I leave tomorrow morning. I'm too exhausted to drive, but I can't go back to sleep. I'll try to update more after I figure everything out. Or at least figure something out. So you know how sometimes things can happen that are so terrible that you block them out? Like something so bad happens that it messes you up in a way that you never realize that you're messed up. In 2006, when I was a freshman in high school, I survived a school shooting. It was in the second part of the school year. We had just gotten off winter break and class had only been back in session for 2 days. I had only just gotten to the courtyard when the first shots rang out. I thought at first that maybe some hunters had just strayed too close to the woods behind the school. But when more shots were followed by screams, I knew that it wasn't. The school had this habit of keeping all the doors locked until 7:15. They wouldn't let anybody in except for the special needs students, and that was through a door by a bus ramp that was locked again after their arrival. Joe, Kevin, and I were about to walk to the parking lot to see if Mika's older brother was still there, because if there was really a shooting going down, the worst place to be would be the heavily populated courtyard where the only cover was some plastic benches and tables. The shots came again, louder and closer to us than before. We kept walking the long distance to the senior parking lot when we first saw the shooter. We had this teacher who was unstable at best, and at worst was an absolute psychopath who had no business being around students. She had only been working there for that school year, teaching freshman English. I was in her class when she finally snapped after a long lead up of borderline shit. She once called a 15-year-old girl a whore for wearing makeup, and told Mika she was going to go to hell for having a girlfriend, and disgustingly fetishized Blake for being all-American. She would lean against his desk, run her fingers along his shoulders and flirt with him. She would run her fingers through Joe's long, curly hair and tug it back to make him look up at her. With another male student, Daniel, she actively sexually harassed him, and despite him going to the guidance counselor and other teachers, nothing was done until she sent him lingerie photos and then accidentally sent them to the entire class. She was fired, but nothing came of it. She was standing over Daniel's body when we turned the corner, her shotgun resting against his blown-out abdomen while he made these sounds that taunted me for years. Gasping, squelching noises. She pulled the trigger and then fired again and then looked up at us, this time with a smile. "Joseph," she said, walking closer and aiming her gun at us. The next few seconds became a blur. All I know is the ground next to us exploded, and Kevin pulled us away while she fumbled with the gun and tried to reload it. A few more students with the same idea that we had caught her attention, and she turned her gun on them, letting us get away and make it to the parking lot. When we got there, it was strewn with bodies, dead, soon to be dead and injured. One of which was Adelaide, a member of our group. She was bleeding badly. She had taken a shot to her torso and the blood was pooling under her. Joe kneeled to help her. He had taken survival classes the summer before and he learned basic triage. He was planning on becoming a doctor, and he would have been a good one too. He took off his jacket and placed it under her head. "It's gonna be okay. Just breathe in soon, help will be here. Someone probably already called the cops." He tried to sound reassuring, but Addie was already white as a ghost. The shots continued to ring out before stopping abruptly. I looked around and then I spotted our teacher walking closer. She couldn't see us yet because of the chain-link fences, but in a second, we would be fish in a barrel. "Joe, can she walk?" I asked, keeping my eyes on her. He shook his head. "I think it hit her spine." He held a makeshift compress to her wound, his other hand holding hers. "We need to go now. She's heading this way," I said, already backing up and getting ready to run to the woods. "She's as good as dead, Joe. We will die too if she sees us standing here." Kevin reached for Joe, trying to pull him up. "We can't leave her." He shook his head. "Come on, Joe, she'll see us. I was cut off by glass shattering next to me. He picked her up and tried to fireman carry her, but another shot rang out. This time killing Addie, landing in Joe's shoulder and spraying the three of us with her blood. Joe screamed out in pain and dropped Addie before he fell. Kevin wrestled him up by his uninjured shoulder and we tried to make it to the tree line. I felt what I can only describe as someone laying something hot against my hip, making me stumble and fall. I got back up, but only in time to see her standing about 50 feet away from us. "Please, please don't." I remember crying, holding to my aching hip while Joe and Kevin stood still, maybe from loyalty or maybe from shock. She said nothing but smiled to me, and she aimed the gun at me before turning it on herself and blowing out the back of her skull. I remember screaming. I remember Kevin helping me stand up and then I passed out. When I came to, I was in triage. The bullet had only grazed my flesh, but it was enough to need 12 stitches. Joe had to have surgery on his shoulder 3 times, and he could never lift his hand above his head after that. 26 were dead, mostly freshmen but a few upperclassmen as well. 30 were injured, 10 were in ICU, and 2 of those would later die from their wounds. I spent the next week going to funerals, attending candlelight vigils and crisis therapy. But I was alive. My best friends were alive. She was dead and it was over. School didn't start back up for close to a month, and when it did, a lot of things were changed. Instead of classes being mixed in, each grade was segregated to their separate buildings. We were given key cards to the locks on the entry doors that could be remotely turned off via the main office at the center of the building. On the first day back, they had gathered us outside the buildings and gave us new ID cards that we would have to use before we could enter the building. The freshman building, Hall C, was the site of most of the fatal shootings. It was weird. We all wished that they would just tear it down, but no one ever acknowledged what had happened there. It's like the entire town just couldn't deal with it. They just kind of forgot it, I guess. As the years went on, I almost did as well. It wasn't until I would notice the long curving scar on my hip that I would remember. Trauma and grief are weird things. I finally got to the cabin around noon, despite leaving around 4 this morning. I had to stop at least 6 times to wake myself up, but I made it. The cabin was gorgeous, and if things weren't so awful, I would want to treat this as a nice getaway. I got out of the car, stretching and looking around. It was remote, like really remote. I had the supposed best cell carrier, and even then, I only had 2G. Caitlin. I turned. Hello? I called out, looking around for Blake. Caitlin. The voice came again, this time closer. The sky became impossibly bright, making my head spin. Sleep deprivation can be awful, you know. I rubbed my eyes and I grabbed my bags and I made my way to the cabin. Blake was sitting on the screened-in porch, looking even worse than he did in my dreams. Katie, you came. I was starting to worry that last night wasn't real, he said, standing to open the locked screen door. I could see every single bone in his hand, and the strong smell rolled off of him as we got closer. It smelled like fake sugar taste, sweet and chemical. I looked up at him, the smell burning my nose and making me want to be anywhere else. Yeah, he said, stopping and walking back to the chair. I have leukemia. I got diagnosed a week after I saw you. It was pretty advanced already, but they tried chemo and it wasn't successful. Now I'm just staying comfortable, he said, grunting as he lifted his legs and rested them on the table. Blake, I'm sorry. He waved his skeletal hand, shaking his head. Last night was the closest they've ever gotten to me. It's not so bad when they look like they did, you know. Like when we were kids. But when they grow up, when they change, they are something else. It's like raw anger and they want nothing more than to kill. He shook his head, closing his sunken eyes. Fareed is bad, but I can't stop running into Eric. He usually stays deeper into the woods, and you can smell him before you can see him. But he is the worst, at least to me. I found him last night. I had always smelled him, saw him walking around, but last night, I saw him close up. He was all bloated, his eyes looked like ping pong balls, and he was just looking at me. He shivered, biting his bottom lip. Blake, what happened? I went to sit next to him before he began coughing, the smell growing stronger. I walked up to him. I said, I'm dying, and he just turned away. I tried to make my way out of the forest, but when I got there, she was standing there, and I couldn't get past her. He shook his head and then he looked at me. Can we go in? I'm getting really cold, he asked, and I nodded. The table was strewn with papers, his binder of death and maps. How much do you remember about the shooting? He asked as he sat down, pulling open a bag and laying it in front of me. I remember what I didn't pay my therapist to help erase, but I still remember a lot. Why? He pulled out a paper that was old and folded, and he handed it to me. Do you remember Daniel Chenoweth? Daniel's name listed for 4 out of 8 classes, along with his student ID number. Of course. That bitch was trying to send me those pictures, remember? God, it was disgusting, I said, reading over names of people who died almost 13 years ago and more recently. I was in the courtyard when it all started. I can still smell it. Blake coughs, and this time so hard that he gags. Did you know the Chenoweths say now that they never had a son? He says, grabbing another binder breathlessly and shoving it to me. I wanted to do a piece after Florida to reach out to families and the survivors. I wanted to tell them, hey, I survived too and it gets easier. He opens to a printed page and slides it forward. I reached out to the Chenoweth family because Daniel and I had grown up together. I asked them for a few pictures of Daniel. I didn't hear anything back from them, so I decided to look up their number. He leans forward, resting his head in his claw-like hands before looking squarely at me. So I call. I finally get an answer, identify myself, and they have no clue who I am. Not only that, they're adamant that they never had a son, only 2 daughters. He leans forward, handing me a roster. Daniel wasn't listed on the old ones I was able to get through less than legal means. He stood up, walking to the other side of the table. So what? You think his parents just pretended he didn't exist? Grief makes people do weird stuff, Blake. You know that by now. Yeah, but grief doesn't exactly erase a person's existence. I looked for his birth records, death certificate, burial plot, anything, and it didn't exist. For all intents and purposes, Daniel never existed. Neither did Adelaide Cortland. Neither did Susan Laudermilk. They never were born, never died. They never existed. At all. He said, pushing a folder of illegally obtained documents to me for me to look through. And when I started to look into it, apparently there was never a school shooting. Like, the only thing that comes up is that on the day that it happened, a bomb threat was called into the school. It was apparently just a cluster mess, but everything was fine. He pushed forward another printout with the date about a bomb scare. What the hell? I asked, reading it out. Local police are investigating after a bomb threat thought to be credible. It was reported to Union High School on Monday. The bomb unit and local authorities spent the morning combing the school but found nothing suspicious. We are definitely on high alert, says Sheriff Abernathy on the bomb threat. It could have been a prank, but you never know these days. No freaking way. Abernathy is the one who helped Joe and I into the ambulance. I saw a picture on CNN of him holding our hands. I threw the paper down, my head throbbing suddenly and making me woozy. I swayed into the hard seat and then I looked at Blake. So what? We just had group psychosis for 13 years, I asked, looking through the rest of the things that slowly tore my reality apart. I don't think so, but have you ever heard of the Mandela effect? We spent the next few hours talking about it, and as far-fetched as it seems, I'm starting to get scared that he's right. Something happened the day that we went back to school. I mean, that's the only time I can narrow it down to. Maybe it was before that, but I don't think so. Anyways, I'm going to sleep tonight. I took an Ambien a little while ago. While I don't know a lot, I do know now that the dream thing is real. Blake needs sleep or he's going to die, and I need him right now, especially for what we're going to do tomorrow. Good night, everyone. I hope I'll be able to keep you updated. Blake fell asleep not long after I posted this last night. We decided to sleep in shifts. He was going to let me go first, but I made him go to bed while I tried to fight past the sleeping pill that I took. I went for a walk, hoping the cold night air would help me stay awake. I tried to do some more research into what I remember from before 2006, but honestly, I don't know where to begin. I remember Daniel, I remember Miss Laudermilk, I remember being shot and I remember being shot at. I remember the shooting. To me, those were real. I have the scar to know that it was real and not some nightmare. I stayed outside until I couldn't feel my fingers anymore, before deciding to make my way back up the wooded path to the house. As I walked back through the woods, I heard my name again. Hello? I called out before pulling my phone out to use the flashlight before realizing that it was dead. Katie, came the voice again, and then it felt like my head exploded. I leaned against a tree, trying not to puke and pass out from the pain. I finally regained my balance and I got back to the house. I opened the front door and immediately, I stepped into Hall C. The bitter cleaning fluid smell and the smell of paper made my aching head swim. It was soon made worse by the bright lights overhead. The classroom doors were closed, and from the thin windows on the doors, I could see the rooms were dark. Blake? I called out, bracing myself again as another fresh wave of pain hit me and made me vomit. I slid to the floor, gasping and digging my fingers into my temples. Katie. I heard once more, this time closer and echoing through the empty hallway. When I looked up, Joe was standing by the door. You can't be here, Katie. You have to stop, he said, walking closer to me. He looked like he did the day the shooting happened. Acne pocked his cheeks and his long curly hair hung around his thin face, from where it had escaped the ponytail that he always wore. Joe, why am I here? I don't want to be here, I said, still digging my fingers into my scalp as the pain seared through my forehead again. You aren't supposed to be here. He stepped closer. He kneeled down a few feet away from me. You have to leave. You have to stop. He lowered his voice. They are going to kill you, he rasped, making me look up. His neck had stretched once more to the abnormally long length. His head rolled back and over his shoulder blades. Go, he gurgled, grabbing my leg and digging his nails into my calf. I kicked away, my skin ribboning under his long nails. Go! He screamed once more, letting go of my leg. I made a run to the door on the opposite of the hall, pushing myself through it before finding myself in the kitchen of Blake's cabin. My leg stung, and blood covered the front of my shirt from my nose. The pain lashed to my skull once more before stopping suddenly, almost like it had never happened. I slid down, disoriented as the room seemed to spin away from me. Katie? Blake's voice echoed from the living room, and I tried to speak, but all I could do was gasp. He turned the door into the kitchen and then he ran to me. Katie, what happened? Katie! He put his hand on my shoulder and I shrugged him off, finally able to scream. My body ached. Every gasping sob made my chest feel as if it was caving in. After a few minutes, I was able to calm down. Blake said that he had woke up for a few hours before, and when he came to the living room, I was gone. He called for me outside, but he didn't hear anything in return till he heard me fall in the kitchen. Did you fall asleep? He got a towel for my leg, as I was now bleeding profusely. No, I went for a walk and I thought I heard you calling for me. I walked into the house and then I was in Hall C. I wrapped it around my leg, wincing as the raw wounds made contact with the terry cloth. How did this happen? He asked, pointing to my leg and standing to grab the first aid kit. Joe was there. He said that I'm not supposed to be here and that they're going to kill me. I tried to stand up, but my head was still swimming from the pain. We got my leg cleaned up, but it was still a mess. My skin felt waxy and blood crusted my face and chest. I elected to take a shower, call my boyfriend, and then do anything to avoid going to sleep. The shower did help a lot. It was a little more than a cramped stall, but it felt like heaven on my skin. I dried off, got dressed, and finally my phone turned back on after what seemed like forever. I called my boyfriend, and after a few rings, he answered. Hello? He asked, his voice making me smile as it always did. We had met in our junior year of college and started dating 3 years ago after finally realizing that we were in love. Hey babe, what are you doing? I asked, sitting down on the couch. Not much. I think you have the wrong number, he said before hanging up. He has been reading my posts here mostly because I couldn't explain it to him before I had to leave. He has a weird sense of humor, so I figured maybe he was just playing around, so I called him back. Very funny, Michael. Shit has been weird to... He cut me off. Lady, I don't know you, and if my wife hears some woman calling me babe, she's gonna kick my ass. You have the wrong number. Please don't call here again. He hung up again, and now I was pissed. It's one thing to joke around, but I felt like hell and I was way past this shit. I called back, but no answer. So I called another 3 times before he finally did pick up. Stop it. This isn't funny anymore. Please, I said, rubbing my forehead again. I'm not joking. I don't know you. You have the wrong number, he said, his voice getting the annoyed pitch it always does when he has to deal with something that he doesn't want to. Your name is Michael Yates. We've been together for 3 years. We live in Arbor Hills apartment complex in apartment 4A, and we have done so for 2 years. Your birthday is January 6th, and you are a veterinarian. Your mom is named Anna and your dad is David. You have a scar on your bicep from falling into a grill at a party when you were 6. Now stop messing around, Michael. I'm not in the mood. I said, this time loud enough that it got Blake's attention in the next room. The line was quiet for a few minutes before I heard a woman in the background. I don't know how you know that stuff, but I do not know you. If you call this number again, I'm gonna call the cops. He said again before hanging up. I went through my phone, but I couldn't find any pictures of him and I together. I tried Facebook, but my account was logged out and apparently it didn't exist. I tried calling him again, but finally a woman answered. Do not call my husband again, you freaking stalker. I'm calling the cops. She said before she hung up. I tried calling again, but I think my number was blocked. Blake looked through his phone. He had long deactivated Facebook, but he couldn't find any pictures of family or friends. He tried to call his mom, but he got no answer. He finally got a hold of his uncle, but he did not know Blake. I don't know what to do. Until yesterday, this was a board for people with insomnia, anxiety disorders, and nightmares. You know, the things that can keep you up so that you get no sleep. We left this morning and we were able to get a hold of one person though. The foreign exchange student, Flynn. He is living in Seattle and has been dealing with some of the same things that we have. I'm at the airport now waiting to board, but I'll post again when we get there. Michael, if you do read this, I still love you. I love you with everything that I am. We're going to fix this, I promise. When we got to Seattle, Flynn was waiting for us at the airport. On the Uber ride back to his apartment, everything was quiet and for a moment, it all felt normal. I found myself pretending that I was just visiting an old friend who had returned to the States. But it didn't last that long. We set our bags down in a sparsely decorated loft and I noticed how weary Blake was looking. The cold, wet weather had taken a toll on him and he looked worse than death. I encouraged him to go lay down. I promised I would listen out for him whimpering or moving and wake him at the first sign of anything going sideways. He tried to protest, but he didn't have the strength to put up much of a fight. He doesn't look so good, Flynn whispered to me, nodding to where Blake laid on the pullout in the living room. He has leukemia and it's pretty bad too. I think that and not sleeping has messed him up pretty bad. I rested my head in my hands, tugging the roots of my hair in hopes the pain would give me a jolt of energy. I had almost fallen asleep twice in the flight, and it seemed like I was past the point of coffee doing much. I thought about finding someone who could sell me coke, but I'd always been strictly anti-drugs. But right about then felt like the best time to reevaluate my opinions on things. Flynn and I continued to talk for most of the day while Blake slept peacefully, probably for the first time in 2 years. I checked him over a few times, but his pulse was steady and his breathing was normal. Maybe it had exhausted itself with me the night before when it attacked me. Maybe it was planning something because it had the last 3 of us together. I don't know. Flynn had a hard time remembering a lot of the details about the school and people. I thought it was odd mostly because I remember in complete clarity a lot of things that I wish I could forget. But people are different when it comes to memories and things. I can tell you the exact color of the art room at my high school, but I couldn't tell you the name of the guy I dated in college, other than I think that it started with an M. Around 4, Blake woke up and joined us. He looked better than he did that day at Starbucks almost 2 years before. Color had returned to his cheeks and his eyes were less dull. We chatted a little bit longer before Flynn volunteered to go pick up Chinese, which we happily took him up on. After he walked out, Blake walked to the door and pressed his ear to it. What are... I began to ask before he waved his hand for me to stop talking. After a few seconds passed, he turned to me. We have to leave now, he said, bending to put his shoes on. Blake, calm down. At least wait for Flynn to get back. I stood up trying to stop him before he made himself sick, but he jerked away. Katie, what is your boyfriend's name? What college did you go to? He asked, moving past to grab his bag. I laughed. I don't have a boyfriend and I went to state, I said, the ache in my head suddenly returning. He pulled out a clean shirt and jacket. What state? What did you major in? He asked, slipping on the new clothing and looking at me. I tried to rack my brain to remember, but the pain began to eat away at me. We didn't have a foreign exchange student, Katie. We didn't. He pulled out the yearbook and tossed it to me before zipping his bag closed and looking out the window. I flipped through to the page with the exchange students and Flynn wasn't there. He wasn't listed for our grade either. Do you remember him? Do you remember anybody named Flynn? He asked, and I had to admit that I didn't. When I was sleeping, I woke up in the auditorium for the first time. Everybody was there, even you. I tried to reach out to you to get you out, but you wouldn't move. I looked for Flynn, but he wasn't there. He arched his neck and he looked at the street below. I nodded, grabbing my shoes, and I put them on before shoving the yearbook into my purse, and I grabbed my bag. We made it out of the loft, but we were stopped by Flynn in the entrance of the building. Whoa, everything okay? He asked, raising his eyebrows at us and nodding to our bags. Yeah, Blake isn't feeling too good. We are gonna go to the hospital. I lied and I continued to walk past him before he stopped me. Well, let me call you an ambulance, he offered, putting his hand on my arm. His touch made the pain in my head flare. I tried to shake away from him. No, it's not that serious. I just forgot my medicine home and I really need it. Blake walked forward, standing behind me. Oh, well, just give me a second and I'll come with. We really should stick together, right? Flynn asked, still not letting go of my arm as his grip tightened slightly. The longer that he touched me, the stronger the pain became. I could smell the blood in my nose, the tears pricking my eyes. Blake shook his head. Nah, it would be better if you stayed here and looked into stuff. Blake grabbed my other hand and walked to the side of me, trying to pull me out of the door and away from Flynn. No, I really think you two shouldn't leave. He tightened his grip once more and I felt the bones shift in my arm, threatening to snap. Flynn, you're hurting me. I finally managed to whimper out, trying to tug away from him. He twisted my arm. A wet snap followed by screaming pain washed over me as I felt my arm go limp. You really should stay, he said once more, letting go of my crushed arm. You really should stay, he repeated again and again. Blake rushed forward, grabbing me and dragging me away from Flynn as he began to stretch into this thing that morphed beyond comprehension. You really should stay echoed out, no longer human words but something else, something primal. He walked forward, and from his twisting body our friends spilled. Their bodies now not only showing them as they were found, but now rotting and falling apart as they came to us. Blake finally helped me to my feet and we rushed to the door, throwing ourselves against it. We bounced back and tried again and again as they edged ever closer to us. With one final desperate push, we were free. It felt like I was falling forever. I can't remember much other than the searing black cold, the blind fear and the pain that engulfed me so fully that I thought I would go insane. It always seems too close to being over, like when you are falling in a dream, but the end would never come. I welcomed death, I pleaded for it. I yearned for whatever the hell this was to stop. And it did. I woke up yesterday morning on the couch at my parents' house. I felt sick, my body aching still as I managed to roll myself up to go to the bathroom in case I had to vomit. I threw up at least 3 times, and I passed out on the floor of my bathroom before my mom found me the next morning. Katie, what's going on? She asked, shaking me awake. I'm fine, Mom, just a bad dream. I pulled myself up and then I threw up again. Well, whatever it is, you have school today. SATs are in 2 weeks and... SATs? What are you talking about? I asked her, moving up to balance myself on the edge of the tub. Caitlin, what's wrong with you? She asked, pressing her hand to my forehead and then sighing. Just stay home today. If you're sick, I'll call Dr. Randolph tomorrow. She walked out of the bathroom, shutting the door behind her. After another hour, my headache subsided enough for me to stand up and try to wash the vomit out of my hair. Something I was becoming far too accustomed to over the last week. In the mirror, I saw the reflection of my younger version of myself. Based on my tragically awful mullet and eye makeup, I looked to be about 18 again. I screamed. I screamed until my dog that had been put down in 2014 came running from downstairs and barked outside the door. That afternoon, I drove to the school and I waited in the parking lot until I saw Blake walk out. He ran towards me and we hugged for what felt like forever, while everybody around us just stared. We had never been friends before, and we both ran in vastly different social circles. But here we were embracing as if we were old friends meeting after years apart. So far, I think I'm in the right place now. I don't know what happened, and I don't know why Blake and I made it out, but we did. I'm starting to forget a lot of things, and I guess since everything resets, I can't go back and look at my history to figure out what's going on. I don't even know if any of you will ever be able to see this, or even when. But today is Friday, March 27th, 2019. My best friend is alive and so is everyone else. I'm writing this from the computer lab at my high school, and I can say that I don't think I'll ever be able to forget non-shitty internet until it catches back up to what I'm used to. Anyways, thank you all for your help again. I now get to go help a new foreign exchange student get settled in. His name is Flynn.